Hi everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of DiagnoseDan. Today we are working on a 2016 Audi A3 e-tron. Now this car is a plug-in hybrid. That means it can be charged from the wall through this socket right here. Now the customer complaint is that this car only drives electric. It no longer drives on the internal combustion engine. When the internal combustion engine is supposed to start up, they get a message in the dash telling them there's something wrong with the car and they get reduced power. So hopefully we can diagnose this one together. Now, as always, let's start out by confirming the customer complaint. Now, as you can see, we've got a check engine light and we've got a TPMS warning light. Now, we're not going to look into the TPMS warning light today. Today, we're going to focus on the internal combustion engine not starting up. Now, what the customer told me is that they start driving electrically, and when the internal combustion engine is supposed to kick in, it doesn't, and they get all kinds of messages in the dash. So let's see if we can confirm that. The car is ready, it's in drive, so let's start driving electric. And hold on, let's see if there's no traffic coming from the right, and we're clear. So let's hit the throttle, and then the internal combustion engine is supposed to kick in, and it doesn't. It really doesn't. And now we're getting messages in the dash. Let's say what it's saying. It says power limit, limited performance. We got a gearbox fault, and we've got an e-tron drive system fault. So I guess that's customer complaint confirmed. Now, I don't know if you guys can remember the video I did on the hybrid X5. That car actually had quite similar symptoms. That would also only drive electrically, and the internal combustion engine also wouldn't start up. Now, the difference being that car had a dedicated 12-volt starter motor to start up the internal combustion engine, but this car uses the big electric motor, or e-machine, as Audi calls it, to start up the internal combustion engine. Now, the e-machine, or electric motor, is working because we can drive electrically with this car, but somehow it's not starting up the internal combustion engine. Now, in the next step, let's see what fault codes we've got stored. Now, the scan tool just finished scanning the car, and we've got two fault codes stored. One in the ABS, and that's for the tire pressure warning, not looking into that now. The other one is in the TCM, or transmission control unit, and the fault code stored is the p2884, engine disconnect clutch, stuck open. Now, this car uses a DQ400 DSG transmission. Now, that transmission is being used in Volkswagen, Audi, Skoda, and maybe even more brands. But the point being, they have been produced in large numbers. Now, I can promise you, if you work on these vehicles, one day you will get one into your shop with exactly the same symptoms and exactly the same fault code. Unfortunately, this fault is pretty common. Now, in this video, we're going to dive really deep in what's causing this fault code. But before we do that, I want to raise the vehicle, and we're going to take a look at that transmission, and I'll try to explain to you what's going on. Now, I put the car in the lift, and I removed the underplating from underneath the vehicle, so we got a great view of this setup. Now, this is the DQ400 DSG transmission. This is the whole unit, and this is the electric motor that is built into the unit. Now, over here, we've got the internal combustion engine, and the fault code we have got is for the engine disconnect clutch, or K0, as Audi calls it. Now, that's a clutch that's built into this electric motor that can either connect or disconnect the internal combustion engine. Now, when that clutch is closed, the electric motor can actually start up the internal combustion engine, and vice versa. When that clutch is closed, the internal combustion engine can power the drivetrain and eventually the wheels. Now, the fault code we have got is that the transmission is trying to operate that clutch, but the clutch is not responding. It's stuck. Now, in this video, we're going to try to find out why that clutch is not operating. As I told you before, this is a very common fault. And of course, the Volkswagen Audi group knows about this, so they released a TPI, or a technical bulletin. Now in that bulletin, they will tell you if you have got this fault code to replace the mechatronic unit with an upgraded version. Now, the mechatronic unit is the part that controls the entire transmission. And it's somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 euros, depending on your hardware version. Now, in the TPI, they don't tell you to check anything. They don't tell you what fails. They just tell you to replace the mechatronic unit. Now, as most of you will know, besides me being a diagnostician, I'm also involved with Europe's largest help desk center, and we're handling over 50,000 cases every year, and we're getting at least 2 questions every day about this exact same fault code, and that's why we know it's a very common issue. Now, we also write aftermarket bulletins on known issues, and we make that available through our software DDTSB. Now, of course, we've also made a bulletin for this fault, and in the next step, let's take a look at the bulletin we created. Now, the first thing we need to do is to select the vehicle we're working on. Now, this can easily be done by entering the license plate number, the VIN number, or by manually selecting the vehicle. Once the vehicle is selected, we go to bulletins and simply enter the fault code. So let's enter P2884, and you can see that the system comes up with a bulletin. Let's open it, and we can see the vehicles affected, the symptoms or fault code that might be stored, and a solution. Now, right now, our bulletin tells you this problem may be caused by a fault in the mechatronic unit. Now, we do give you some extra information, but at this point, our bulletin also tells you to replace the mechatronic unit. In our DDTSB bulletins, we like to provide our customers with more and better information than is available from the manufacturer. Now, although in our bulletin we do give some extra information, in this case, we also just tell you that there's something wrong with the mechatronic unit and it needs to be replaced. Now, that's actually not good enough for me, and I like to provide you guys with some extra information. So when this car came into my workshop and I saw the symptoms and the fault code, I thought this was the perfect opportunity to diagnose this problem properly and get to the bottom of this issue. Now, hopefully in this video, we can answer a few questions. The first question being, can this fault be prevented from happening? Because this is quite an expensive repair. The second question is, what's actually failing inside that mechatronic unit and why does it fail? And the third question is, does that mechatronic unit actually needs to be replaced or can it be repaired? Now, hopefully we can answer these questions in this video and we can update our bulletin and make it available to our customers. Now, when we are creating a bulletin, we work closely together with manufacturers, parts suppliers, parts manufacturers, and experts in the industry. Now, when it comes to automatic transmissions, or in this case, a DSG transmissions, Sam from ATR Transmissions is my go-to guy. Now, ATR doesn't only fix and rebuild automatic transmissions and supply parts, but they also have got a remote department where they can remotely program or code your transmission or help you with diagnostics. And they're one of the leading companies in this field in Europe. Now, I called up Sam. He's one of my friends, actually. And I said, Sam, I've got this Audi in the workshop with this fault code. And he started laughing. And he said, I just released an article on this exact same problem. And I'm willing to bet you a crate of beer that you've got the exact same problem as I described in this article. So if he is right, that's going to cost me a crate of beer. This is the ATR Remote website. And I really encourage you to visit this website and read this article because there's some fantastic information in here that's very hard to come by. Now, we'll also put a link in the description of this video. Now, what this article basically tells us is that there is a gasket in between the mechatronic unit with some oil passages. Now, in those oil passages, there are filter screens. Now, one of those screens actually breaks and the debris of that screen end up in a solenoid that controls the engine disconnect clutch. Now, when the debris of the screen end up in that solenoid gets stuck and it can no longer control the clutch. Now, that is very helpful information, and instead of just replacing the mechatronic unit, we now have something to look for. Now, this does mean we need to remove the mechatronic unit from the transmission, and that's exactly what I'm going to do in the next step. Now, if Sam is right, it is going to cost me a crate of beer, And although I'd rather drink it myself, it's a price I'm happily willing to pay. Now, when I'm actually giving this some thought, what if I invite Sam to pick up the crate of beer, open one, and maybe we can drink it together? Now, so far, I drained the mechatronic unit of its oil. I removed the oil pan, and there was an electric water pump in the way. So here you can see where I drained the oil of the mechatronic. There's one over here and a drain hole over there. Then I had to remove some water hoses that were in the way and an electric water pump that was over here. And then I could remove the oil pan. But the next thing we need to do is remove, if I remember correctly, 16 torque screws, and then the mechatronic is ready to come out. Now this is the transmission with the mechatronic unit removed. Now in between the mechatronic unit and the transmission, there are gaskets that are supposed to seal off these oil ports in between the transmission and the mechatronic unit over there and over there. Now the mechatronic unit is on the workbench, and when we take a closer look at those gaskets, we can see there are oil screens in those gaskets that are there to prevent dirt and debris from the transmission making it into the mechatronic unit. Now, I took a careful look. All the screens are there, each and every one, except for the one Sam told us that would be missing. Now let's gently pry off this gasket. And let's compare it to a new one, because Sam was that confident we had this exact same problem that he sent me a new gasket for comparison. Now this port runs to the K0 clutch, and that's the clutch that engages and disengages the internal combustion engine. Now you can see on the new gasket there is an oil screen, but on the old one it is missing. Now that clutch is hydraulically activated by oil pressure. Now behind this hole there is a solenoid that controls the flow of pressure to the clutch. Now if the screen is missing, there's only one place it could have gone, and that's into the solenoid. Now when we take the gasket apart, let's try that. It's two pieces of metal, and sandwiched in between is that screen. And you can see that that screen, if I can get it out of here, there we go. That screen is actually one part. One part with that part missing. To get to the solenoids, we actually need to take this mechatronic further apart. Now, this is the transmission control unit, and underneath that control unit are the solenoids. So I'm going to take it apart so we can take a closer look at that solenoid. Now I took the mechatronic unit further apart. You can see there are lots of solenoids in there, but those are not the ones we're after. Those were on the other side, and those are right over here. Now this is the pressure accumulator, and this is the hydraulic pump that delivers the oil pressure for the transmission to operate. Now over here, I've got the transmission control unit, and this is actually the solenoid we're after. Now let's remove that solenoid, and let's see if we can find our missing screen. Now we should be able to push the solenoid right out of the housing by pushing at the top of the solenoid. So let's push it, and it should pop right out. There it goes. And the moment of truth, let's see if we can find our missing screen. Oh, and just look at that. There it is. Just like Sam told us, it jammed right into that solenoid preventing that solenoid to move. I don't know if you guys can see that, but there it is. No doubt about it, this is our issue. Now, in his infinite transmission wisdom, Sam already brought me the parts to be able to fix this issue. He was very confident. And you've already seen that he sent me these new gaskets. And he sent me a new oil pan gasket. He sent me a new solenoid. He sent me some O-rings and a gasket for the connectors. By the way, you can no longer use this solenoid because the piston is scratched and it will leak oil pressure. So you need to replace it. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this further apart. I'm going to thoroughly clean it to make sure no debris stay behind. I'm going to put it all back together with the new solenoid. And this transmission should be good as new. I thoroughly cleaned the mechatronic unit to make sure no debris are left behind. I installed the new solenoid, installed the new gaskets, put it all back together, installed the mechatronic unit into the transmission, and now we need to fill it back up with oil. And after that, we need to do an oil level check. Now, to do that, we actually need a scan tool. Now, I already filled the transmission with 4 liters of oil, and in the next step, we're going to add another 2 liters. Now, this is probably going to be a little bit too much, but when we're going to do the oil level check, some of the oil, the excess oil, will drain again, so we will reach the perfect level. So right now there is a little over 6 liters of oil in the transmission, and now we need to remove that adapter. Now this could become a little bit messy, so make sure you've got your plug ready. So let's unscrew it. And hopefully we don't make too much of a mess. There we go. And put the plug back in there. Now, of course, I ended up making a mess, and I'm going to smell like transmission oil for the rest of the week. Now, when I removed that adapter, some of the oil came over the overflow pipe and actually drained back, and that's because we overfilled the transmission. Now, why would we overfill the transmission? Now, that's because the entire transmission and the mechatronic is still drained of its oil, and that's also why we need a scan tool. Now, the pump of the transmission is not driven by the combustion engine, but it is electric. Now, to make sure all the oil spreads through the transmission, we need to run that pump. And remember that accumulator, that oil reservoir, that's also drained of its oil, and we also need to fill that one up. So in the next step, we're going to do that using our scan tool. When the transmission is drained of its oil, what could potentially happen is when you turn on the ignition, the hydraulic pump could run dry, and that could potentially damage the pump. Now, to avoid this, when the transmission detects there's no oil, so when it doesn't build oil pressure, or when you have followed the official procedure to drain the oil, it will lock that hydraulic pump. Now, you will actually need a scan tool to unlock the hydraulic pump, and if you don't, the transmission won't work. Now, in that procedure, the scan tool will ask you if you have filled the transmission with oil, which we did, and after that it will unlock the pump, and then it will start filling the reservoir. After that, we can start checking the oil level, and to do that, the oil temperature needs to be in between 20 and 40 degrees Celsius. But unfortunately, in our case, the oil temperature is only 17 degrees, so it won't perform that procedure. The temperature of the oil was actually too cold to perform a level check, and the scan tool wouldn't even continue with the procedure. So I was thinking of ways to increase the temperature of the transmission, and I actually went into the car and I could actually fire up the internal combustion engine. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but right now I'm revving that engine. Now this proves that our clutch is working again. So let's go through the gears. And right now I am monitoring the temperature of the transmission, and it's 22 degrees, and that's enough to perform an oil level check. So we are ready to perform the oil level check. So in the next step, I'm going to activate the oil level check with the scan tool. You will hear the pump start running. I will unscrew the plug and the excess oil will drain out. Now the procedure is finished when we get a steady drip. Now let's start the procedure with the scan tool and you will hear the pump start running. There we go. Let's unscrew the plug, and this is probably going to be messy again. And let the excess oil drain out. Now once the transmission stopped leaking excess oil, or when you get a steady drip, you can finish the procedure. You can reinstall the plug, tighten it, and then the transmission has got the correct oil level. Everything is reassembled and the oil level is checked, so I guess it's time for a test drive. We're on the road again, and right now the wheels are being powered by the battery. So when we move a little, let's start moving, you can see that the wheels are being powered by the battery. Now let's come to a full stop. Now once we start accelerating and the internal combustion engine kicks in, you'll actually see the combustion engine appear in this picture. Now let's start driving. And we're still driving electric. Still driving electric. Now let's hit the throttle. And there we go. The combustion engine kicks in. Absolutely no problem. So I guess we've got a fix. I took the car on an extended test drive and it shifts just perfectly. And the combustion engine kicks in time after time. And I also read the fault codes and there are no longer any fault code stored. Now let's do a recap of what we have learned so far. In between the transmission and the mechatronic unit, there are two gaskets. Now in these gaskets, there are metal filters, strainers, screens, whatever you want to call them. But one of those screens, the one for the disengagement clutch for the internal combustion engine, over time fails. Now so far, we've only seen them fail over 100,000 kilometers. When it fails, pieces of that screen end up in this solenoid. And this solenoid is the solenoid that controls that clutch. That clutch is hydraulically activated. And once the screen ends up in this solenoid, it can no longer move and it can no longer control the clutch, meaning the clutch either stays open or closed depending how that screen gets stuck in that solenoid. We've actually been studying this fault code for quite some time now. So it was a great opportunity to finally have one in my shop, and we were able to diagnose it together. Now in the background, my colleagues have been working very hard for weeks to try to learn everything there is to know about this transmission. Now while we were diagnosing it, I shared all our findings with them and sent them all the pictures. Now we've now combined everything they've learned, what we've learned, and what we have learned from partners like ATR Transmissions, and we have now updated our bulletin in DDTSB. Our bulletin now contains a lot more information than the OE bulletin. The OE bulletin simply tells you to replace the entire mechatronic unit. It doesn't tell you what fails, why it fails, or how you can prevent it from failing in the future. Now, you could still choose to replace the entire mechatronic unit just to be on the safe side. But Sam, who has been doing this repair for many years, assured us that as long as you follow the right procedure, the chances of anything else failing on this mechatronic unit after this repair in the near future are very slim. The issue with the screen getting stuck in the solenoid is actually one of two major issues with this gearbox. The other one has to do with the loss of hydraulic pressure. Now, during our investigation, we also found the answer to this problem, and that problem can actually be very easily solved with very little parts and without removing the transmission. Now, we'll also upload that bulletin to DDTSB very soon. A few tips for the ones who are going to attempt to do this repair by themselves. Always replace the solenoid. Not just simply remove the stuck screen from the solenoid and try to clean it, because that screen will have scratched the inner side of this solenoid and it will start to leak and it will no longer function properly. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are different hardware numbers on the mechatronic unit that use different solenoids. So always make sure you use the right number of solenoid. Now, don't try to be smart by removing the screen when installing a new one, and try to prevent this from happening. Because when you shut down the transmission, some of the oil will flow back into the oil pan. Now, The pieces that aren't stuck in the solenoid will flow back, and when you install a new gasket without a screen and you install a new solenoid, it will get stuck in the solenoid again and you can start all over. Now, for the ones who own a car like this, please consider replacing this small 30 € gasket before your car reaches 100,000 kilometers, and you can prevent this all from happening in the first place. There's one more thing left to do before ending this video, and that's keeping my promise. Sam, this case of beer is coming your way, and maybe we can drink it together. Now, I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my channel, and when you hit the little bell, you will get a notification each time I upload a new video. And remember, DiagnoseDan fixed it again. See you next time, guys. Now, this does mean we need to remove the mechatronic unit from the transmission, and as I said, that is very helpful information. And instead of just removing, I thoroughly cleaned the mechatronic unit to make sure no debris are left behind. I installed the new solenoid, I reassembled the mechatronic, and installed the mechatronic back into... I thoroughly cleaned the mechatronic unit to make sure no debris are left behind. I installed the new solenoid, reassembled the whole mechatronic...